Tonight, you'll open the fridge. You'll grab something wrapped in plastic. You won't think about where it came from or how strange that would have looked 10,000 years ago. But the real answer to what humans ate before farming is far stranger than cavemen gnawing on mammoth bones. For most of your species' history, there was no fridge. There was no plate. There was no guarantee of a next meal at all. And yet, your ancestors survived, thrived, and spread across nearly every climate on Earth without planting a single seed. How? Start with a number that sounds impossible. Agriculture is only about 12,000 years old. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. That means for over 95% of human history, nobody farmed anything. No wheat fields, no rice paddies, no livestock pens, just whatever the land offered, and the skill to find it. So what did that actually look like on a given day? Forget the cartoon image of a man in a fur loincloth chasing a woolly mammoth with a spear. That image is mostly wrong, and it has quietly shaped how you think about your own ancestors for over a century. Anthropologist Richard Lee spent years studying the Juhuansi people of the Kalahari Desert in the 1960s. He expected to find a population teetering on starvation, scraping by on whatever meat they could catch. Instead, he found something that upended assumptions about prehistoric life entirely. Most of their calories came from plants, specifically from the mongongo nut, a fatty, protein-rich seed that grew abundantly nearby and required almost no effort to gather. Lee calculated something remarkable. The Jew/Huansi worked roughly 12 to 19 hours a week to meet their food needs. Compare that to your own work week. Hunter-gatherers, in many documented cases, had more leisure time than you do right now. This wasn't an isolated case either. Across the world, foraging societies leaned heavily on plants, roots, tubers, berries, nuts, wild greens. Insects, in many regions, made up a significant and reliable protein source since they were far easier to catch than a fleeing antelope. Meat existed, and it mattered, especially in colder climates where plant life was scarce. But meat was often the unpredictable bonus, not the daily staple. Here's where it gets stranger. Your body still remembers this. The human gut, your teeth, your taste for fat and sugar, all of it was shaped by a diet of wild, fibrous, nutrient-dense food gathered across dozens of different sources, not the narrow, processed, calorie-dense food most people eat today. Your ancestors might have eaten over 100 different plant and animal species across a single year. You, statistically, eat from a list of fewer than 20 staple foods on repeat. Why does that matter? Because variety wasn't a lifestyle choice back then. It was survival insurance. If one plant failed to fruit, another would. If the herds moved on, the rivers still held fish. Diversity meant resilience. A narrow diet, by contrast, was a vulnerability nobody could afford. This is where the twist comes in, the part that quietly reframes everything you thought you knew about paleo eating. There was no single Paleolithic diet, not one universal menu humans were designed for. A forager living near the Arctic Circle ate almost entirely animal fat and protein, because nothing edible grew there for most of the year. A forager near the equator ate mostly fruit, tubers, and insects, because the land offered abundance year-round. Biological anthropologist Catherine Milton, who studied primate and early human diets extensively, argued that flexibility, not specialization, was the actual evolutionary advantage. Humans weren't built to eat one ideal ancestral diet. Humans were built to eat almost anything, depending on where they stood. That flexibility might be the single most underrated trait in your evolutionary story. Consider fire. Once early humans controlled it, something changed that rippled through the entire trajectory of the species. Cooked food is easier to digest. It releases more usable calories per bite than raw food does. Primatologist Richard Wrangham proposed that cooking didn't just change dinner, it changed digestion itself, freeing up energy that would otherwise have gone toward grinding through raw fibrous plants and tough raw meat. That extra energy, Wrangham argued, may have helped fuel the growth of a remarkably energy-hungry organ, the human brain. Pause on that for a second. The simple act of holding food over a flame may have helped build the very organ you're using to process this sentence right now. Food wasn't just fuel, it was infrastructure for everything that came after it. Now picture a typical day for a forager, somewhere in Eastern Africa, 50,000 years ago. There's no breakfast table. There's a landscape, read like a map memorized over a lifetime. Which trees fruit in this season? Where the tubers hide just beneath the soil? Which insects cluster under bark after rain? Children learn this not from a textbook, but by walking alongside adults, watching, tasting, failing, trying again. This knowledge took decades to fully master. Some studies on modern foraging societies suggest peak foraging efficiency isn't reached until someone's 30s, or even later. That's not a flaw in the system. That's a sign of how genuinely complex this skill set was. Hunting and gathering wasn't primitive simplicity. It was a deeply specialized, location-specific expertise passed down across generations. So if the diet was varied, flexible, and skill-intensive, why does the myth of the meat-obsessed caveman persist? Partly because meat leaves evidence. Butchered bones survive in the archaeological record for millions of years. Berries do not. A pile of fruit rinds decomposes long before anyone digs it up. So early archaeology, working only with what survived, overweighted meat in the story, simply because meat was what fossilized. That's not deception. That's just the bias of what remains. But newer techniques have started correcting the record. Microscopic plant residue on ancient stone tools, starch grains lodged in fossilized dental plaque, chemical isotope analysis of ancient bones, revealing roughly how much of a diet came from plants versus animals. Each new method has pushed the picture further away from caveman eating only meat and closer to something far more textured, omnivorous, adaptive, regionally specific, and surprisingly plant-heavy in most warm climates. Here's the part that should make you put your fork down for a second. Your modern diet, the one delivered in boxes and bags with nutrition labels, is a historical anomaly. Sugar in the quantity you consume, it did not exist for your ancestors. Refined flour did not exist. Ultra-processed food, engineered to override your natural sense of fullness, did not exist. Your body evolved over hundreds of thousands of years inside an environment where calories were hard to get and variety was a survival necessity. It evolved in scarcity. It is now operating inside abundance. That mismatch between an ancient body and a brand new food environment is not a moral failing. It's a mechanical one. Your cravings for fat and sugar aren't a personal weakness. They're an ancient survival strategy, tuned for a world that no longer exists, still running in the background of every trip you make down a grocery aisle. So the next time you stand in front of that fridge, consider what you're actually looking at. Not a failure of willpower, not a simple convenience. A genuinely new chapter in a 300,000-year story, written faster than evolution could possibly keep up with. Tonight, you'll open the fridge. You'll grab something wrapped in plastic. And maybe, just for a second, you'll think about how strange that would have looked 10,000 years ago, and how the real story of what your ancestors ate was never about meat or mammoths at all. It was about flexibility, knowledge, and a body built to survive almost anything the land could offer.